So let us bring in our friend Rob Von Esch. We're going to chat this morning. What's going on, Rob? With there's probably no new laws going in. We're in California, so we don't like new laws and regulations here, do we?
Yeah, we're not a very regulated state here in California. Yeah, right.
Oh, geez. Okay,
Well,
so what do you got for us today?
Well, I wanted to talk to the audience about a couple of things that I see going on in the real estate market as far as how laws are impacting, I think, financial viability of certain real estate investments. And a couple of years ago, there was this law that was implemented, and everybody was just kind of generally referring to it as the balcony law. And this law requires apartment buildings and condominium developments that have exterior balconies and staircases that are made out of wood and above 6 feet in height to all be inspected by January 1st, 2025. Well, there was a recent amendment to the Health and Safety Code that was imposing that requirement that gave apartment buildings an extension until January 1st of 2026. So they basically got a 1-year extension to comply. But for condos, the deadline still remains January 1st, 2025. So that's already passed. So apartment buildings get an extra year till 2026. Condos, your deadline still remains January 1st, 2025.
You're either in compliance or you're out.
Right. And basically, you have to have a structural engineer come in and evaluate all of this stuff and determine whether it's structurally sound. And it's becoming a big issue because, one, if you're in an apartment building setting, it could actually be difficult to get the study done, which is why they got an extra year. You have a bunch of tenants that you have to coordinate with to be able to get access to some of these things. So it could be a big thing. Like I've actually seen situations where landlords are having to serve 3-day notices on their tenants just to get their tenants to comply with this survey that they have to do. I mean, there's evictions.
What is a 3-day notice? Explain that a little bit, Rob.
3-day notice is something a landlord gives to a tenant saying, look, I've already told you in writing that I need to inspect your balcony, for example. You're not making it available for inspection. You're not returning my calls. You're not coordinating with my inspector. I'm giving you 3 days to comply. And if you don't, I'm going to evict you. Becomes the basis of an eviction. It's essentially a 3-day notice to perform or quit. So if you don't allow the landlord to have access, evictions move forward. And I've actually seen this happening. I'm involved in representing landlords that have had to do this. And it's just very difficult to coordinate with some tenants to do this stuff. I mean, many of them, most tenants are very helpful and are making their units available. But when you get into, apartment buildings, you've got all kinds of people, all kinds of walks of life, and all kinds of personalities you have to deal with. And sometimes it's difficult to get some of them to comply.
So how does that work then when you go dealing with something like Los Angeles, where, I mean, the tenants can do anything they want to, even not pay rent, and you can't evict them.
Right.
But, here's another law that says, well, you better do this, and you can't. How do you balance those two?
Well, it gets tough. And, my opinion is if you've given the tenant, written notice in advance that, hey, we need to do this. And then I always like giving another written notice saying, hey, we're trying to do this inspection and you're not complying here, call us so we can coordinate a date. We've got a deadline to do this as a matter of law. We've got a deadline we have to comply with. And then if they haven't done that, then serve the 3-day notice and eviction proceedings can move forward based on that. And it's a difficult thing because evictions these days are not cheap. When you have tenants that are difficult, they ask for a jury trial when you're doing an eviction. You have a right to do that. But I mean, that complicates things. Now, all of a sudden, that 30-minute to 1-hour trial, because a typical eviction trial in front of a judge is 30 minutes to an hour. But when you're asking for a jury trial, it's a whole different thing. I mean, it takes, the better part of a day to pick a jury. And then you have to prepare jury instructions. And there's all kinds of pre-trial motions about what evidence a jury gets to see. And a jury trial can take a couple of days. It's just way more complicated and expensive. And when you have tenants out there that are trying to game the system and make it very difficult for the landlord to remove them, it's a tough thing for a landlord because it gets expensive, it gets time consuming.
I want to go off the legal side and get your opinion. And again, Rob's giving us opinions and education. It's not legal advice. A lot of laws make sense. Some of them are pretty stupid. I just call it the way it is, right? Is the foundation of this law logical?
Well,
is it going to serve a purpose, or is it just
I'll tell you
one-sided?
why. I'll tell you why it's here. Let's say maybe 5-6 years ago or so, there was an apartment building in Berkeley up by the college. So a bunch of college students were renting this unit, and it was, really a college kid apartment complex. But the balcony collapsed.
Oh, okay.
And a bunch of kids died and got seriously injured. And it was a huge deal. I mean, it was all over the news.
Sure.
I even saw it on things like Fox News. So, I mean, it was nationwide news and certainly big news in the state of California. So the state legislature got together and decided, hey, we need to do a law to prevent these kinds of things from happening, to protect renters and even homeowners, really, because condos are affected by this.
Sure.
And they're homeowners. We need to protect them. So this law was then written up and implemented as a result of that balcony collapse in Berkeley.
So it makes a lot of sense then.
It does, but it causes a lot of headaches because
unintended consequences from our legal system,
right,
from our legislators.
Right. If you have the apartment buildings, it could be very difficult to get a full inspection completed, which is why they're getting an extension. And it can be very expensive when you have to deal with uncooperative tenants. And then on top of that, you still have whatever the cost of repair is. I mean, if you think about an apartment building that might be, let's say you're trying to buy an apartment building, and let's say it's something in the LA area. Well, chances are that apartment building that's for sale was built in the 70s or the 80s. And so now you're looking at a stair system or a balcony system that is 50, maybe 60 years old.
Sure. So you may have some dry rot or something.
That's
in there.
right. You might have termite damage. You might have dry rot. So you could have a lot of very expensive repairs that arise out of that. And I was talking about complications with tenants in just getting the inspection performed. Imagine the complications with tenants you might face when you now have to make significant repairs. You're talking about having to perhaps evict some of the tenants, or at least displace them, and then compensate them for that displacement while these repairs are being made.
Sure.
I mean, if you're taking away the stairs that they use to go up to their front door, obviously they can't live there.
Right.
If you're taking away a balcony, that could be a safety issue while that's being replaced. So there's all kinds of unassociated, really unconsidered costs. Not unassociated, they're very associated costs, but unconsidered costs that go along with the implementation of this law. I mean, it's very difficult to coordinate all of this with tenants when you have to actually get your report, see what the report's going to require you to fix, and then actually do it, and then get all of these tenants to cooperate with it. It's a very
permits and financing and all that, right? And the inflation cost of materials, the whole bit is
certainly, and you're having to do it now too, at the same time that we've just had all these major fires. And so all of those repairs are beginning to take place. So materials are already kind of being priced up, right? Because of demand.
Supply and demand. Absolutely. Contractors.
You got it. Labor is going up. So it's a very difficult thing for apartment building owners. And it's also difficult for condos. And condos have to do the same stuff. And even though their deadline has already expired, there are still a lot of condos out there that have not complied with this deadline. And
I wonder if it's something that they have to deal with if there's going to be a disclosure, if a property tries to get a condo's attempted to be sold, if it does or doesn't have this certification.
On the head. You're hitting the nail on the head, because earlier you had said something about eligibility for qualifying for a loan. Well, you know what? I think what I'm talking about really falls into the category of eligibility, because I've seen this now. I talk to lenders all the time, as I get a lot of referrals from lenders and real estate professionals. And I'm beginning to hear that they've gotten a loan almost to the finish line, right? It was approved. It's gone through underwriting, at least the bulk of it, as far as does the borrower qualify standpoint.
Right.
But then you get to the end and the lender says, oh, hey, one more thing. Has this property undergone this staircase and balcony assessment? And if so, what are the results? And I've now been hearing stories of two scenarios. One is it hasn't undergone it at all, in which case the lender is saying, well, we're not going to lend until you show us what the study results are. Or two, it has undergone the study and it turns out there's going to have to be comprehensive and very expensive repairs made to many, if not all, of the staircases and balconies in a particular project. So,
Wow.
I mean,
throw that on top of all the increased costs of insurance, and you're going to start seeing a lot of homeowners association problems.
Well,
we're going to come back and talk more with Rob Von Esch about this. Continuing our conversation, Rob Von Esch is with us, and I say this in every segment just so that we keep things kosher. Rob's an attorney coming in here sharing information with us, not legal advice. If you want legal advice, give me a call at 800-306-1990. I know where to find Rob, and I can introduce you. So let's get back to our conversation, Rob. We've got that balcony law. It's that was interesting when you start thinking. I guess when they put these laws in place and they set the deadlines for them, there's no way that they could possibly have figured out that the beginning of January we're going to have this major fire catastrophe, and what we're going to happen later in January when we start seeing some of the different battles through the administration and costs of lumber and whatnot going up. But it's going to have a major impact. And what's the penalty for the landlord that doesn't comply? Did they build that into the law?
Well, that's a good question. I think as far as the condominium association situation, I think the way the penalty is going to work is what is going to end up happening is once you have unit owners that are potentially unable to sell their units because lenders won't lend because this is not done, you're going to see unit owners suing their homeowners associations to force compliance.
Yeah.
So then you start getting into, like any lawsuit, well, what are the attorney's fees associated with that, right? Because a lot of these lawsuits, you can recover attorney's fees when you're in a homeowners association. And then two is, well, what kind of damages have the unit owners incurred or sustained because the law hasn't been complied with in a timely fashion? And if you have a bunch of units that can't be sold, then all those unit owners are going to say, hey, you're damaging us, homeowners association, to the tune of X amount of dollars. There's a way to calculate what that loss is by not being able to sell your home. It definitely is a calculable number. So there is, in the association context or condo context, kind of the way you're going to see it enforced is eventually it's going to be the homeowners that are going to begin to demand that it's complied with so that they can sell their units. And in the apartment context, you're going to eventually get tenants who already scrutinize landlords in our state very thoroughly, and they're very critical of how the landlords take care of the property. And you're going to start seeing tenants saying, well, hey, wait a minute. Have you inspected my balcony? Have you inspected my staircase? No. Well, I'm going to sue you. So it's kind of almost funny for me in the landlord context, because it seems like it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're going to have these tenants that are going to make it difficult for you to comply because it disrupts their lives. And then you're going to have this other batch of tenants who are going to then sue landlords saying you haven't done this fast enough. So it's a very difficult situation. And when I say difficult from a lawyer, to me, what that means is expensive.
Sure.
Because all these problems are going to cost landlords money. It's just a very difficult situation to be in. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you're getting ready to buy or sell a condo, for example, or even an apartment building, these are probably things you should be looking into. Has this been done already? Has this requirement been fulfilled? Because if it hasn't, there is in my mind, a tremendous negotiating opportunity for a buyer of any of these places, assuming that any lender is even going to lend on this, right? Because that's the
Sure.
first thing. Because if a lender's not going to lend, then obviously the price is going to be much lower.
Right.
But if a
You
lender
can only
will,
go to the cash buyer then, who says, I'm willing to take that risk, and then I'll make sure it happens on my own.
that's right. Yeah. So there's obviously going to be a dramatic reduction in price for that type of a buyer. But assuming a lender will lend, then the next question you're going to be asking is, okay, what's it ultimately going to cost for me to do this? And I think if you're in the context of a rental property or an apartment building, it's going to be whatever the cost to get the study is. Let's just call that between $5,000 and $30,000, depending on the size of the project, how many units.
I was going to say, that's probably per unit, not even per project, right? Because if you've got, I mean, we do a lot of stuff out in the Coachella Valley, and you've got some projects out there that are 300 and 400 units.
I mean, absolutely, Ron.
It's going to be massive.
That's a massive thing. If you're looking at something that big, that's a much bigger expense. So, but that's just the beginning. The study is just the first step. Then the second step is, what does it actually cost to fix it? Now you're getting into a situation where it could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So there's a lot of variables that any purchaser of these properties or seller or owner really should be thinking about, because it impacts the value of the property that's going to transact.
That's amazing.
And these are all things. And not only is it just the cost of the study, the cost of repair, but then it's the cost of dealing with tenants if you're going to have to deal with that too. And a lot of people overlook that. So there's a lot of things that impact the price associated with this new law.
Yeah, that just goes with the typical Sacramento stuff. I think most of them have good intentions, but sometimes the execution is a bit of a problem. And the unintended consequences.
Sure. And a lot of these people that are making these laws have no clue of what they're really doing. A lot of them are not landlords and don't understand this. And a lot of them don't understand how this plays out in reality when you've got lenders, tenants, and you actually have to get a lender to perhaps overlook that this hasn't been done. And what does that do to anybody's ability to sell? You're now locked in and frozen unless you find a cash buyer. Or you've got to deal with tenants and have them cooperate with this law that you're imposing on a landlord. It's way more complicated than these lawmakers have ever even thought through when they decided to put these laws in place.
Well, and even worse is what happens if you buy the property and you have you got a loan, and you get down the road and someone gets hurt and you didn't get this done. Now you've got negligence on top of somebody getting hurt, which is really bad.
You have
that compounding.
Absolutely, Ron. Or what about if you bought a property and the lender did not think about this balcony law compliance issue? And let's say, for example, specifically, you're in a condo. Now you're the owner. And let's say 6 months to a year later, you get a notice from your homeowners association, hey, we're going to specially assess each unit owner $30,000. Could be a bigger number.
Which is not out of the norm.
That's right. That's right. So now all of a sudden, you just got into your condo, you're a new homeowner, and now you got to come up with an extra $30K on top of that. And this is the stuff that happens.
Wow. Ooh, that's a bright way to start. I think aren't we glad it's National Cocktail Day? Well, you listen to some of these things. We're going to continue. Maybe we got a better one from Rob when we come back into our conversation. Attorney Rob Von Esch is with us, not giving legal advice. He is sharing with us educational information. Maybe, now here's one that you don't usually hear from attorneys. So Rob's actually giving us advice that might keep us away from having to go visit the attorney, which is great because Rob does that all the time. So we appreciate you, Rob. What else do you have for us that's new this year?
Well, I just wanted to continue on with this just a little bit further. And so I just want to, make sure the audience understands I'm not telling anybody this for doom and gloom and everything else. I'm trying to educate you so that you can hopefully use this information in a positive way. Know up front what the status is with this balcony law compliance so that you can negotiate a price that factors in this potential risk. And, the other thing I was going to say too is in line with the balcony and staircase, study and structural integrity law that I just went through, if you're buying a condo, you should also be looking at the reserves. And a lot of people overlook this. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen buyers just completely look at me with a blank look when I'm talking about the reserves. And about every 3 years, a condo development has to have a reserve study done, which means they have to assess the useful life of all of the things that the association is required to care for: the roof, the siding, certain plumbing, the foundation, whatever it is this association is required to care for. It's called the common area. That's what the association has to take care of. You need to see a reserve study so that you can see, has the association actually adequately funded their reserve? Because if the project is 40 or 50 years old, and ladies and gentlemen, most of the condos now in our state are beginning to be about that age.
Yeah.
If they're 40 or 50 years old and major upgrades have not been made to these old roof systems, plumbing systems, electrical systems, and so forth, guess what? They're in need of replacement. They're right there at that point in time in their useful life, which means you're going to have to do expensive renovations to the project. And what happens is if the association has not adequately increased their monthly HOA dues over the many years that they've been funding their reserve, chances are that reserve's underfunded. So what that means is, again, you're going to be getting another special assessment. So it's not only a special assessment potentially for the balcony and the staircase, it's a special assessment for all of these other things that now have to be fixed, and the reserves are underfunded. So you're going to be getting an assessment for $70,000.
How do we know what the reserve should be? If it's underfunded, overfunded, how would we know that? Does it say that on the HOA documents?
Good question. The reserve study is going to tell you that.
Oh, okay.
So you need to look at the reserve study. That's the whole point, is it tells you what the useful life is and what the likely replacement cost is at a certain point in time. And the reserves are supposed to be funded to keep the budget or the reserve amount in line. It's like a savings account.
Okay.
So
it's like our emergency fund. That way
right.
We're saving for something that we know it's going to happen. We just don't know when.
That's true. And so, but the problem is that some of these associations have, and of course, naturally are very resistant to raising their monthly dues. So you've got some of these associations that have dues that are still in the $300 to $400 a month range. And it's, like, guys, I hate to tell you, but the cost of actually fixing this stuff is way more than, what could be saved for $300 to $400 a month, plus maintaining all of the other operational costs
and dealing
of the
with
project.
And obviously the biggie in California is also the HOAs all have to deal with insurance.
That's right. Insurance, whatever the labor costs are just to have the pool cleaned, the grounds kept up, slurry seal on the streets, whatever. So you have to raise dues, and a lot of these complexes have not. So the reserves are grossly underfunded. So again, what I would also encourage any potential buyer or seller of a condominium to do is to look at these reserves, because again, this gives you very valuable information about what the real value of the property is that is often overlooked.
Well, that makes, the whole idea here, I think you hit it on the head, Rob, is that it's not a matter of you're saying buy it or don't buy it, just buy with knowledge.
That's right.
Right. Go into it with your eyes open. And, we talk always, whenever we're talking about anything to do with our real estate and the liabilities, safety, liquidity, and return. Well, if we have to deal with an underfunded association, that's going to have an effect on our return.
Right.
And it's also going to have an effect on our liquidity, because if they come after us and say, hey, I want another 10,000, and that's not an abnormal number.
Right.
Right. Saying we have an assessment for 10,000. We might give you a year or 2 years to pay it, but pony up.
Right. And just so you know, if you can't pay it, if you are an owner of one of these condo units, then what happens is they impose a lien against your condo for the amount of the assessment, and they foreclose. That does happen. And
wow,
condo complexes are fairly aggressive foreclosers, in my opinion. So yeah, if you don't pay the assessment, you're going to get eventually a foreclosure action against you, and your house will be sold to pay that lien. So, I mean, it's just understand all of this going in. Again, I'm not trying to freak people out. I'm just trying to give you food for thought so you can better assess what the value of something really is.
Make an informed decision.
That's right.
It's amazing all the things that go in and they're behind the scenes. Rob, how does somebody, just the lay person that's not listening to Ron Siegel radio, and you should be, but that they're not listening. How do you find out about some of these? Do you guys put out a newsletter or something like that has this information, or?
No, I just try to, do educational things like this,
Public speaking.
That's right. Yeah. This is how I get the word out. But yeah, you're not going to be able to find it on my website. I just don't do that. Sorry, everybody. But, I do try to do these sorts of engagements as much as I can to get the word out. And now and knowledge is power.
So we got about a minute left. Tell us a little bit about your firm.
Well, my firm is in Fullerton, California. It has 5 lawyers, 4 support staff on top of that. And we have a family law department that does all divorce and that kind of stuff. And then we have the real estate and business department, which is headed by myself. So we represent a lot of people that are in real estate fights, whether it's disclosure or anything else, landlord tenant issues. And I have a lot of business stuff that I do, partnership disputes, contract fights, or even preparing and negotiating contracts. So a lot of that stuff is the bulk of what happens in my office.
And I'm going to share that in a lot of instances, by going and talking to somebody like you early, it's a lot cheaper than going to talk to you when it's late.
100%.
Right?
100%. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at somebody and said, if you would come to see me before you did the deal, we wouldn't even be sitting here now. Because
there's preparation stuff. And I can also say I don't even know how many years we've known each other, Rob, but it's been a long time. Every client or family I've ever sent or person I've ever sent to Rob, they've always been very, very excited about the work that you and the firm do. And so if you have information or need information or have things that fit in, give Rob a call or his office a call and get their guidance, get their counsel. And I've shared this many times. My belief is that professional guidance doesn't cost you anything. It'll save you in the long run. So, what's the old story? Pay me now or pay me later.
That's right.
So
the pay me later is usually pay me 5 times later.
Right. Exactly. So if you want to meet Rob, give me a call at 800-306-1990, 800-306-1990.